Myanmar, where renewed hostilities between the Myanmar military and the ethnic minority armed groups, the Arakan Army, have spread to various townships in western Myanmar, where civilians have been caught in the crossfire as the fighting escalates. As of now, rebels have taken control of predominantly 7 states within Myanmar, including Sagaing, Shin, Rakhine, Kachin, Shan, Kaya and Mon. All of those that you can see on your screens right now. The situation in Myanmar is rather grim. Civilians are being forced to flee from their villages amid the renewed fighting. The loss of life and habitat, injuries and limited health care is the current reality of Myanmar. Civilians are recovering from physical and mental trauma of the airstrikes. Now, Myanmar, of course, as we know, is our bordering state, sharing 404 kilometers worth of land border with Mizoram, 390 kilometers with Manipur and 398 kilometers with our neighbor Bangladesh, which makes the developments in Myanmar, even more important for us. In this telecast, we take a deep dive into the history and geography of Myanmar and what exactly is then the future of this war. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee with us, Major Sudhakar Ji with us. I also have with me Professor D.K. Giri and Professor Madhav Nalapat. Let me begin with Ambassador Mukherjee. Okay, let's begin with Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, I'd just like to understand from you, so your reading of the current developments in Myanmar, given that this is now 2 years into the military coup and the situation continues to only worsen, where do you see this headed?
Devika, you'll recall that when there was a problem in Myanmar and the military junta took over, there was an influx of individuals from Myanmar into India, of particular groups of individuals. Now, the fact is, many of these individuals have been greatly influenced by China. The Chinese Communist Party follows a policy of befriending the Myanmar military, at the same time making sure it is diverted and weak by basically fueling insurgencies against that very same military, which is why more than 40% of the so-called India-Myanmar border is actually the India-China border, because it is China-controlled groups that basically control that access in that border. Now, you'll recall that, I had said at that point in time, please understand that this is an issue which needs to be looked at in security terms as well, because many of the people who were coming in at that point in time were armed militants, funded, fueled by China. And now, possibly, the target which China is looking at is no longer Myanmar, but India. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you have a movement of people. Now, some of them may be innocent, there's no question about it. But many of them, unfortunately, would be pawns of the PLA. And from that point of view, what you're seeing is basically highly trained, motivated, armed people who have been fighting for a so-called autonomous and independent republic, which basically will be completely under control of China for a long time. And they may import that particular insurgency into India and once again, inflame the situation in Mizoram and other sensitive northeast states. I think that is China's game plan. So let's not just look at it in a teary-eyed way. We have to be very cold-blooded about the situation. And we have to say very clearly that this is a security issue. And the point is, the people of Myanmar have to settle their disputes between themselves. And secondly, Myanmar being a sovereign country, it is wrong for any particular group in Myanmar to take up arms and try and create a so-called independent homeland that is completely out of bounds in a world where sovereignty needs to be respected. So I'd like to sound this note of caution right now, exactly as I sounded when you remember when the military junta took over, large numbers of people crossed over into India. And frankly, it was treated as a humanitarian issue and not a security issue. I'm sorry, it is front and center security issue. We are seeing the impact of that in some parts of the Northeast. And I fear that many of the elements who are coming in will fan the same flames in other parts of the Northeast of India.
Absolutely. I'll come back to you in just a moment, Professor Nalapat. Let me bring in Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee into the conversation as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, how do you read the developments that are currently taking place in Myanmar, and where do you think this civil war, in a way, in a sense, is headed?
It's not the first time that there has been this kind of fighting between the various tribes that constitute Myanmar's population and the Myanmarese military. What is new in this case is that the tribes have seemed to have formed an effective military alliance, and they are actually causing casualties on the Myanmarese military. That is something unusual. As far as its impact on India is concerned, so far we have been able to manage the fallout, including as far as the infiltration of refugees who are affected by the fighting. There are two kinds of refugees. One are the civilians who also have families or connections on our side of the border, and the other are Myanmarese military officers fleeing from the junta. In the case of the latter, we have sent them back to Myanmar. As far as refugees are concerned, we are trying to manage the best we can by trying to ensure that they don't infiltrate deeper than a certain kilometers, 16, 20 kilometers deep into our territory. But if it continues, and if the Myanmarese army takes more losses and they lose control of territory on which is adjacent to our side of the border, then it will have implications. We will have to move in many more armed forces there, because along with those who infiltrate our border, we also have drug traffickers. We could have those who wish to foment trouble in our northeast, that is to say those who are in the pay of the Chinese, etc. It would have far deeper implications. So far, with the Myanmarese military forces, we have had a working arrangement despite their human rights violations and their treatment of civilians, because of the need to control and police our porous borders with Myanmar. But if that arrangement breaks down, if they lose control, then we would have to look at other standby arrangements. Devika.
Right, absolutely. Major Sudhakar ji, same question to you, sir. Where do you see this current situation in Myanmar now heading, and do you think that there's something that India ought to then prepare for, given our border situation with Myanmar and given how we've seen in the past where the influx of arms and ammunitions have been recently in the northeast?
Devika, thank you for getting me to your show. And you have asked a huge question with a large scope. Let me address them one by one. First and foremost issue that comes to my mind is that it's a very complex problem unfolding. Like the previous two co-panelists have highlighted, that it is nothing other than a security-related threat and issue to India, which constitutes sub-issues like migration of population. You have collateral damages, spilling over of hostility into our own terrain, drug trafficking, and host of other issues. Mind you, it is not to be seen in isolation. If you look at the whole issue in isolation, then we are missing the woods for the trees. It has to be seen in the larger picture. What is the larger picture? The larger picture is there is an intersection of the axis of interest of China and India. As far as China is concerned, most of us may not be aware of the fact that the southwestern province, Sichuan province, and Xinjiang province, which is the western province, these are two hugely landlocked countries, and the shortest distance at which they can have access in the warm water seas of Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea are through the CPEC and the CMEC. CMEC is one of the oldest so-called BRI project in earlier names, which started long time back but picked up momentum say in recent past. But CMEC, unfortunately, is being intersected with the Act East policy of India. So therefore, there is a clash of axis of interest between China and India. Now what has happened is our viewers need to understand there is a huge difference between what used to happen prior to February 21 and what is happening now, that is post February 21. Prior to February 21, all kinds of internal mobilization or kind of, a protest used to be a very peaceful protest in Myanmar. But post 2021, which was not anticipated by the military junta or the Tantodo, is that all these protest organizations, they have created a militia which has got a significant armed component. This was not expected by the military junta. And this military component, it has got three important parts or three groups. They call it the Brotherhood Alliance, and this alliance is turning out to be a big challenge to the military junta of Myanmar. And among this, there are two states within Myanmar which are very seriously affected. One is along the northern border, that is the China border, that is the Shan province. The other one is the Chin state, which has got borders with Mizoram. And the tribal communities of Chin state, they have their affinity with the tribal community with Mizoram. Anything that is taking place with regard to pro-democracy movement is supplemented with the military activities by the pro-democratic parties against the military junta. Recently, the military junta having undertaken military offensive against the pro-democratic party, they have created mayhem and displaced large number of people. I am told the latest research figure is around 2 million. It could be more than that. Out of this, significant number have come into India, and majority of them are in Mizoram. Some of them are in Manipur. Some have actually shifted to North India. So therefore, it is a big threat to India. India needs to take a real look at the border management. Fencing has commenced. Our anti-infiltration grid has improved. The deployment is improving. The surveillance grid is also improving. That is not enough. The biggest danger, in addition to what I have shared, Devika, is the drug trafficking and the gun running. Actually, the informal route of infiltration of guns, state-of-the-art weapons, are from Rui. Rui is a place in the northern province, north of northern province of Myanmar, and from there is no license, there is no processing of legal documents to buy a weapon. They are sold at a very cheaper rate. They are coming into Myanmar, and from Myanmar, there are almost about more than 26 subgroups, ethnic groups, which is holding under the name of the United Democratic Front. And these are the people who have got affinity, who are operating in India as well, that is in Manipur. The weapons, the drugs, the money laundering, all these are coming in a big way into India. India has to wake up, and we have to take a very serious look at it in a very consolidated and in a serious manner. Back to you, Devika.
Absolutely. Bringing in Professor D.K. Giri as well. Professor Giri, what is it that you feel then India really needs to watch out for as far as the situation in Myanmar is concerned?
Well, I think you had the insightful presentations from all three panelists, and I totally agree with them. And my just predecessor gave a very detailed description of what is happening in Myanmar. I would only say, and agreeing with our first speaker, Professor Nalpat, that we need not look at them at teary eyes. We have to take a hard, pragmatic position. Let me share an analogy with you. Look at what is happening in Palestine and Israel. All Arab countries are in full sympathy with Palestinians, but they don't want to take any of the refugees. Refugee meaning Hamas penetrating in the name of refugees and creating trouble in those countries. So similar situation is here. We will have militants coming in, and then disturbing our peace here, including grabbing territories at the behest of China. So it is, China is the elephant in the room here. We have to be very careful and fence our borders and absolutely prevent anyone from coming in. Because this is not a human issue. Guard our borders. Burma situation is very complicated, and this will continue until Burmese sort themselves out. But we should not have any trouble in our territory coming out from Burma, really. So that is what I would say for now.
Okay, all right. Coming back to then Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, you of course have spoken about what is it that India needs to watch out for. But as far as our situation of a porous border with Myanmar is concerned, is that something that we need to rapidly look at? And is there anything that we can actually even do about it? Is there a possibility?
Well, we can do a lot about it, and you know, the military expert on this panel knows what has been done in Kashmir, for example, to prevent infiltration from Pakistan-controlled parts of that Indian state, apart from other parts or which are controlled by the Pakistan military, including in Pakistan, the whole of Pakistan. And so, from that point of view, there's no question that we can do it. The point is two things. One, you recall that when this military coup took place, I was one of the very few people in our country to basically say, hold it, we have to stand by Aung San Suu Kyi. And we have to stand with the democratic parties in Myanmar. We can't just look the other way when the juntas, arrived riding on a tank and breaking through the people's, barricades and things like that. So, a decision was taken, I think, that India will continue a policy of basically a friendly policy towards the junta. And there was even a perception, which frankly was the perception of the United States and Europe, the two parts of the world that frankly have wrong perceptions about a lot of events that take place, in their own boundaries and outside, that the junta is actually anti-China. The reality is the narco trade. The narco trade is the mainstay of the money that the PLA and GHQ Rawalpindi use to fund these illicit and including terror acts. So the narco trade is central. And unfortunately, a large part of the narco trade now, the market is being looked at, is India. So you have this combination of narco terrorism, you have this combination of geopolitics driving narco profits, then driving geopolitical situation. And you have this very real situation, which any military man who has been, or police man who has been in that area will testify to, that China has heavily infiltrated these groups. And but for the Chinese support to them, the Myanmar military would have removed that threat to its sovereignty long ago. But the point is, Aung San Suu Kyi needs to be released. She needs to come back. Because every day that she spends in jail, this problem is going to go worse. And more people are going to turn to violent methods against the military, and some of them will turn to terrorism. So I think I would like to reiterate what I said at that point in time, and I've been saying continuously, which is, let's strongly say that civilian rule should come back in Myanmar and the junta should go, and Aung San Suu Kyi should be rescued from the prison that she's in and be brought back as the effective head of state in Myanmar.
All right, Ambassador Mukherjee, bringing you back into the conversation, as far as the role of the Chinese is concerned, have you seen that, or have you noticed any sort of a difference in the way the Chinese were initially operating in Myanmar and the way they're operating now? Because back when the coup happened, of course, on the face of it, to the world, the Chinese said this is the last thing that we wanted to happen. But we all know, of course, the reality behind that. But at the same time, there are also, of course, reports on how Russia is now the biggest arms supplier to the military junta. What do you make of these developments within the larger region itself?
Well, they are doing what they are very good at doing, which is to have a finger in every pie. There are disturbing intelligence reports coming that the Chinese, who earlier used to more or less ensure that the army is not displaced from this region, are now taking a laid back position and not helping out the Myanmarese military when they are taking losses by this new military alliance of three main large tribal groups, which could mean one of two things, Devika. Either that they want to weaken the Myanmarese military forces up to a certain extent to make them more dependent on China, or they would like to have this region in chaos so that there is flow of refugees, drug traffickers, those who support China, etc., flow across the porous border into India and cause more problems for us in the northeast, because they know very well that we have a well-established arrangement for many years now with the Myanmarese military of ensuring that the porous border is more or less under control. So it could be either of these two things, Devika, or it could be both. But in any case, given the visceral hostility and hatred of the Chinese towards India, it would appear to me perhaps to be the latter, that they would like to foment trouble in the northeast, and the best way to do it is to ensure that the Myanmarese army, which is a professional army in uniform, takes losses so that some of the border areas next to India fall into the hands of the tribal forces, that the Myanmarese army then try to take revenge, and then they are pushed across the porous border into India. So it's a grim situation and needs to be very carefully watched over the days and weeks to come.
Absolutely. Major Sudhakarji, same question to you, sir. What do you make of, the Chinese somewhere maybe changing their stance, withdrawing slowly support from the junta, or at least they claim to be, and the Russians there finding a place for themselves to continue supplying arms?
Devika, all through and through in NewsX channel, I have time and again emphasized on the issue that the big elephant in the room is China. China is by having a global aim by 2049, no matter what the economic and the current situation, internal problems may be inside China today, they are aiming to restore rejuvenate the global stature by 2049 or earlier than that, and challenge the USA as a superpower. One, in order to achieve that, they want to assert and also expand their hegemony, regional hegemony, now within the Asian nations, and particularly South Asia. As far as Myanmar is concerned, Devika, there are 3-4 components. One is the external component that we need to look into. External component, it is very only axiomatic to state that China is doing all this by design. It wants to actually push everything towards Indian border, and maybe some of us may not be aware that the border with Myanmar, between Myanmar and India, is shifting towards India. It may be a very horrific statement I am making, but you check the documents, carry out research. This border is a shifting border, which China is forcing the Tando, that is the Myanmar junta, to do it. So therefore, all I am saying is China is playing a very big role in a discrete manner, in an incremental manner. It is eyeing for the minerals within Myanmar, eyeing for the access to move towards the Bay of Bengal so that it can establish. They have incidentally carried out a successful trial of multimodal transportation of cargo from Singapore across Thailand, across Myanmar to Sichuan province, 3,700 kilometers in just about 3.5 to 4 days time. I don't know what speed they are moving with. And there is an oil pipeline, there is an optical fiber, there are communication network which have come up. Why look that far? The Cuckoo's Island is just about 17 kilometers away from the northern tip of Andaman. So therefore, there is a big design. China is going to come in, and all our northeastern states, Devika, all 7 of them, if you study in detail, the borders of our northeastern states are always already dotted with the Chinese enclaves. You call it the military enclaves, call it the civilian population or the engineering population. So therefore, we have to adopt a very, very holistic strategy, which is happening. I am very happy to state in this forum that post 3rd of May, the government of India has taken very stringent measures to counter all these movements, whether it is the external threat coming from Myanmar or the border management or the internal order, to large an extent, but lot more has to be done in order to bring in stability to our 7 sisters so that the spillover effect of what is happening in Myanmar does not impact adversely to our 7 sisters in the northeast. And Bangladesh is one particular case to be examined and taken seriously. Out of $37 or $38 billion, China has committed almost $22 billion on ground. And there are more than 24 to 27 projects which are nearing completion. Talk about a flyover, talk about the naval dockyard, talk about the Tri-Services Organization, which they are supporting Bangladesh Navy, Army, Air Force, and a host of other pipelines. This is the largest huge deposit of the gas which has been discovered in Bangladesh. China is trying to lay a pipeline across Myanmar and take it to its CMEC and through that to Sichuan province. There is a huge potential for the issue to go out of hand. Therefore, we need to look at it in a serious manner and take suitable measures so that it doesn't flare up in future. Back to you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.